Bills Mafia. On tonight's Air Raid Hour, we will be breaking down all things Bills Steelers, including updates on key position battles, depth concerns at a few major positions, and the signing of players like Ty Johnson. But first, a little bit of music to set the mood.
Welcome to the Air Raid Hour, a Cover One Network podcast. Here are your hosts, Judge Mathis and Tilt Money.
Welcome in, ladies and gentlemen, to the show this evening. Apologies for being off last week. We had a couple of things come up last minute. We weren't able to put out a show last week, but we are back this week to talk Bills Steelers, which was not the funnest game in the world to watch, right, Dave?
Well, and then even more painful going back and watching the replay and just shaking your head at things. However, I will say, glass half full type of guy that I try to be. I'm not saying it always is successful. There were some things I noticed in rewatching the game back that I'm going to take a few silver linings from this one, and we'll get into that in a bit here.
As always, we have our weekly challenge, and our weekly challenge this week is when this show is over, comment on this video with your biggest concern heading into week one. I think the theme of social media on Saturday night was there was some panic within Bills Mafia. Obviously, there are the people who, even when it's a preseason game, are going to go really, really far over the top and are going to be calling for Sean McDermott and Ken Dorsey and Brandon Beane's head. And then there's the people who maybe, in my opinion, are underreacting a little bit to Saturday's preseason game and they just think it doesn't matter at all. It's just the preseason. They don't care at all about what's going on the football field on Saturday night. And then there's people sort of in the middle where it's like, there are some concerning things about this football team, and this football game brought those concerns to light. So whatever your concerns are, hit us up in the comment section after the show with your biggest concern for the Buffalo Bills heading into week one. But Dave, I want to start this show with a little bit of talk on discipline. And we have a comment in the comment section already from RJ Melville. And he says 2 words, Land Clark, who was the official for that game. He said, that's why it was ugly. Pre-snap penalties were unacceptable, though. There was the Spencer Brown block in the back, which was not a block in the back. And I also, the touchdown that Hayward caught, he literally blocked Kyer Elam into the end zone from the 3-yard line and then turned around and caught the football after essentially like shoving him to the ground. That was definitely an offensive pass interference. So 2 major no calls in this football game. One killed all of our momentum on the first drive, and the other one gave the Pittsburgh Steelers 7 points. But that being said, 4 turnovers, 12 penalties, even though some of them were kind of iffy. A lot of false starts for the Buffalo Bills. And this is not like it's something that was a surprise to Sean McDermott. He made the comment after the game. He said, I thought we nipped it in the bud in practice. We were pulling guys off the football field, essentially benching guys who were getting pre-snap penalties, but then they go out in the game on Saturday and they're still getting pre-snap penalties. So again, there are people who say the preseason doesn't matter, but that was a little concerning to me. How about yourself?
A little concerning. I also thought the play down near the goal line where Kyer Elam got called for the pass interference was a little questionable as well. Gave the Steelers a new set of downs, which would have been a 4th down, and then they still almost made the goal line stand. But as you mentioned, a couple plays later, that's when Kyer Elam got shoved into the end zone. So a couple of penalties and kind of situations not going our way, one called, one not called. The discipline is something that you like to see, or you would want to see that not happen in the preseason, because you feel like if you've been preaching it in practice, that's something that will translate over. However, what I will say is that I think going from practice or training camp to a preseason game is probably even, I would say, a little bit more of a jump than going from the preseason to a regular season game. And what I mean by that is you're going against an actual opponent in the preseason. You're going against an actual opponent in the regular season game. I think at least gives you a chance to reflect and really say, hey, like, we're pulling guys off the field in practice, but that really hasn't gotten the job done. And yes, I know there were a ton of penalties on the Bills in this game, but the pre-snap stuff, you've got to clean that up by week 1. And the Bills have another week now, fortunately, in the preseason to kind of figure this out. Now, remains to be seen how much those guys will play in this third game, but a lot of those penalties coming with the first team. So that's the thing. Like, you can say it's not a big deal, and in some ways it's not. But at the end of the day, you would have liked to see them come out and play a little bit more cleanly, a little bit more disciplined, regardless of whether you think it doesn't matter or not. Like, the fact is like, you can't have that stuff carry over into the regular season. So maybe it'll be a blessing in disguise that it happened to the Bills in the preseason as opposed into week 1, right? Because now they can actually clean this up in the next couple of weeks. So that's kind of like the silver lining to this whole thing is, okay, very undisciplined game here. Week 2 of the preseason, have another week, another game, a preseason game and practice to get this ready to go by week 1.
It'll be really interesting to see if Sean McDermott plays the starters again this upcoming week. Maybe gives them a drive or two to see if, when they step out on the football field, that they're a little bit more put together than they were against the Steelers. It's kind of a bad taste in your mouth to want to carry over to the regular season. I made this comment on social media, and as a fan, it's frustrating to root for a football team when they come out and play like that, because it legitimately looked like the Buffalo Bills on Saturday came to, I'm going to call it Heinz Field because I don't even know the name of the new field. Accenture, I don't know. It essentially looked like they showed up to Heinz Field for a walkthrough, and the Pittsburgh Steelers showed up to play a playoff game. That was the difference in the intensity level between the two football teams, quite frankly. It's disheartening as a fan to watch, and it's really upsetting because I know that that's not what Coach McDermott preaches to those football players on a weekly basis. So it's going to be really interesting to see if he sends a message and tries to put them out there week 3 of the preseason for a drive or two, just to get a little bit of a better taste in their mouths.
Yeah, and I mean, you'd like to kind of, I mean, Tomlin and McDermott, I mean, McDermott hasn't been a head coach nearly as long as Tomlin, obviously, but both defensive guys, they know each other very well. Stylistically, I don't think they're all that different from how they run their ship inside the building. Both guys kind of, more of the CEO types of their organizations. And you would have liked to think that, in the spirit of competition against his buddy there, Mike Tomlin, Sean McDermott would have had his guys a little bit more ready to go, like you mentioned Mike Tomlin did with the Pittsburgh Steelers. And the Pittsburgh Steelers were ready to play. And I mean, obviously, they have a lot to prove this year as well. Kenny Pickett has a lot to prove, but you saw Kenny Pickett come in, throw that touchdown to Pat Freiermuth, and that was it for him. They were good with what they saw from Kenny, and they sat him down. So, they kind of took away the more positive, probably, taste in their mouth, and we'll see if the Bills starters get any run here against the Bears.
Your boy Lettuce coming in with a super chat, and I got to say it because it's a super chat, but he says, our offense is not beating Goff. I don't know. Jared Goff doesn't play defense, your boy Lettuce, and I don't think we played the Lions this year, so I don't know why you would. No. You would post a comment like that.
He just wanted you to say it.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, before we get into the meat of the show tonight, speaking of meat, pepperonis are meat and they go on pizza. And this show is brought to you by Picasso's Pizza. 4 great locations in Williamsville, West Seneca, Lancaster, and Blaisdell. Buffalo Pizza since 1980. You can order online at picassospizza.net. And if you're an out-of-towner like us, you can even get it mailed to your home. And I can tell you from experience, it's just as good as getting it fresh from the restaurant. Again, that is picassospizza.net. So the fact that you can get Picasso's Pizza ordered to your house from anywhere in the United States on game day, that's a positive, right? Head over to picassospizza.net for that. Speaking of positives, let's talk about some positives and some positive takeaways from this football game, because we are going to vent the next 2 segments after this one. So let's get the good stuff off of our chest now. Dave, what was maybe 1 or 2 positives? You can start, and then we'll just sort of lobby back and forth in the comment section, lobby in as well. What are some positives that we took away from this football game?
Yeah, I think positives were, Gabe Davis looked pretty sharp, catching the ball, really nice route running from him. Obviously had the big play taken away, negated by the penalty, but I thought Gabe Davis really kind of asserted himself now and showed that he's ready for week 1. No real major concern that wasn't going to be the case, but it was nice to see him get targeted pretty frequently by Josh early. I thought that a couple of the younger guys, a couple of the rookies looked good
Mhm.
in this game. I thought Dalton Kincaid looked excellent. A couple of those tackles made me a little nervous the way he kind of rolled on a couple of those tackles, but
Oh,
he
yeah.
obviously got. I don't know if anyone else like cringed a
Yeah.
little bit when they saw Dalton Kincaid getting tackled on 2 different occasions. Got popped right back up, but he looks really the part, and
Mhm.
him being so involved early with the ones and kind of getting that run with both the ones and the twos really huge positive. And then I thought, Osiris Torrance and Dorian Williams acquitted themselves pretty nicely in this game for all things considered. I think Torrance was not noticeable necessarily on the offensive line, which I think
Mhm.
in this game was a good thing. I watched a couple of the pass protection snaps with him and Spencer Brown on that right side, and looked pretty good, I thought. And I didn't think the
Mhm.
run game really got going very well in this game. Obviously, the Bills didn't average a very good number on the ground, and really with the ones, they didn't really get the run game going with James Cook. One kind of nice run with Latavius Murray, but I think overall Torrance um, probably cemented himself as the starter for week 1. And I know Eric put the video out for that. And I thought Dorian Williams late in the game made some nice plays
Mhm.
against the run, made some nice plays down at the goal line. So the rookies, I think overall the theme there, a very positive takeaway for me in this game. You saw some flashes of what Deontay Hardy could do.
Mhm.
Again, another play where gets taken back because of penalty, but um, I think Deontay Hardy's going to be a nice piece of this offense as well. So not a ton of like volume necessarily in this game,
Mhm.
and that's exactly right, Jason. When you
Yeah.
hear zero about Torrance, he's doing his job. I thought he played really well. And so for me, I guess the overall theme positive takeaway was those 3 rookies to me. The first 3 picks of the Bills draft this past year, all I think fared quite well.
Yeah, I mean, you gotta feel good, right? The last couple of years, the Buffalo Bills have struggled to get some of their early round picks onto the football field. It really appears, and Dorian Williams had a great game, and we could talk more about Dorian Williams in a moment. Justin Shorter had a great game. We could
Yeah,
talk about
shorter
Justin
too.
Shorter in a
Yeah.
moment. So the Bills' first 4 picks really all flashed in this football game, but at the end of the day, Dalton Kincaid looks
Mhm.
like he's a guy who's gonna be on the field a majority of the time his
Mhm.
rookie year. 3 catches, 45 yards. Swole Beasley. That's what he looked like. That's where the Buffalo Bills were targeting him over the middle of the field, looking for some of those quick things, looking at using him as a sort of a safety valve, an escape valve, looking for him over the middle of the field. The nuances in his route running, his ability to get open, his ability to shake off guys, mismatching, using his size as a mismatch. He's a guy who I think when the Buffalo Bills first drafted him, it was like, all right, let's temper our expectations. Let's temper them. Who knows how much he'll even see the field, how much the Bills will run traditional personnel versus 12 personnel. I think you're going to see the Buffalo Bills in 11.5 personnel for a majority of the time this year. I really do, because it's going to be very hard to justify taking this guy off the football field the way he played. And then you mentioned Osiris Torrance as well. He really just blended in. I mean, Pro Football Focus wanted to give him a 40 pass blocking grade for absolutely no reason. There was a couple of minor errors that he made over the course of his 19 snaps, but all in all, a solid outing from Osiris Torrance. That's 2 in a row. He stacked 2 in a row. I think he's going to be your week 1 starting right guard. Now, can he hold that once the regular season starts? We'll find out. And he's gonna get a baptism by fire week 1
Mhm.
against guys like Quinnen Williams. But
Yeah.
it's really exciting after a couple of years of not seeing our early round picks playing, seeing first 2 picks on the football field making plays, and they both appear to be in the starting lineup for the Buffalo Bills.
Yeah, and I mean, how nice is that, right? Because I
Mhm.
mean, the whole talk right around the draft and kind of when Osiris Torrance fell into the Bills' lap in the late second round was that a luxury pick? Was
Mhm.
he, a widely considered the best guard in the draft? The Bills didn't necessarily, at least on paper, look like they had a bigger need at tackle than they did at guard, but they went ahead and took Torrance. And look, maybe that's going to change some things um, from a swagger standpoint, from a temperamental standpoint across this offensive line. I do hope he holds the job. I think that if the Bills can kind of continue to see him progress in his pass protection, which is an area obviously that is his weaker of the two between the run blocking and the
Mhm.
pass protecting, then he's going to be in decent shape. Now, I guess another good thing for him is that the pass protection kind of around him has really fallen by the wayside. So for him, the bar maybe isn't as high to clear as you might think. So
Mhm.
I'm really happy about that, though. I think that it really also puts the Bills in a good position with Ryan Bates too, because I think Pat Moran mentioned it on Twitter. A few others have, is like, I think Bruce Nolan mentioned it as well. Like, the sooner you sort of implement Torrance as your starting right guard, maybe you can give some of the tackle snaps to Ryan Bates. So we'll see if that actually happens as well.
David Edwards is another guy at Wisconsin, played right tackle as well. I know our guy Merck pointed that out too. So maybe if Bates can do left guard, center, right guard, then it frees up David Edwards even possibly to move to right tackle. But David Edwards is a pretty stiff dude if anyone's ever seen David Edwards on the football field. So
I know,
maybe
and
not the kind of guy you're going to want at right tackle, but it's definitely a possibility as well.
And I was hoping, I was kind of going back and refreshing myself on my Nick Broker research, and all of his snaps in 2022 and or before he switched over to guard were at left tackle. So I don't think that's going to be an option for them at this stage either.
Looking at the Bills, a couple of other guys that stood out. Jay Sternberger had a nice catch for 27 yards. Justin Shorter, 5 catches for 47 yards. I want to talk about Justin Shorter, but last week we said, hey, Matt Barkley versus Kyle Allen. Could Matt Barkley be the number 2? Does he know the playbook better, even though he's not as good of doesn't have the arm talent that a guy like Kyle Allen does, the athleticism a guy like Kyle Allen does? Could Matt Barkley win that QB2 job? He did leave the game with an injury, but 4 turnovers for Matt Barkley in this game. Not a great game for Matt Barkley. Meanwhile, Kyle Allen steps in and he goes 12 for 15 for 112 yards and a touchdown. So low key, even though I was so mad that I turned the game off and I had to rewatch it later, Kyle Allen had himself quite a second half. And the beneficiary to that was Justin Shorter, who caught his 5 passes for 47 yards and his first career touchdown. Not that it counts, but what are your thoughts on Kyle Allen and Justin Shorter?
Yeah, I mean, Barkley, especially the one down near the end zone, like that was just such a bad throw right to the defender. I mean, the fact that it was tipped was a miracle in itself. It should have just been picked straight away. But anyway, Kyle Allen did fare okay. And what I liked about sort of that dynamic between him and Justin Shorter was it wasn't like Kyle Allen was putting the ball where Justin Shorter could catch and run. Like it wasn't the most accurate of balls he was giving to Justin Shorter, but Justin Shorter was plucking him out of the air, really using his hands well. I thought body control for Justin Shorter was really good. And, one of the things that we talked about a lot about Justin Shorter in the scouting reports of him coming out and getting drafted was his like ability to kind of run downfield and kind of be that striding type of receiver. But in this instance, he kind of showed a little bit more of a complete package in some of that body control, 8 to 10 to 12 yards beyond the line of scrimmage, using his hands and kind of contorting a bit to make some of those difficult catches and really bailing his quarterback out a little bit on some balls that weren't exactly thrown perfectly. So I was really impressed with Justin Shorter. This conversation now about kind of who sticks as the, 6th wide receiver on this team is going to be really interesting. There's a lot of Justin Shorter fans. There's obviously a lot of people who have hyped up Andy Isabella over the last couple of weeks. And he also had a pretty decent showing, I thought, as well, and was the primary and first return man out there ahead of guys like Darrington Evans and Khalil Shakir. So, I mean, this battle for the last wide receiver position is going to be interesting, but Justin Shorter really could not have hurt his cause with what he did in this game.
To me, watching this game, Dalton Kincaid locked up the fact that he's going to be in the starting lineup in terms of the fact that the Bills are going to be base 11.5 personnel. I think Osiris Torrance locked up right guard. I think Kyle Allen locked up the backup quarterback gig, mostly because he played well and Matt Barkley got hurt. And I think Justin Shorter locked up wide receiver 6. I don't think there's really a question at this point. He was the Buffalo Bills' most recent 5th-round pick. He came out. He put up the statistics that he did. He showed not just field stretching ability and gunning ability, which is what he's known for. As you mentioned, he showed an ability in the intermediate. So those guys, I think, all locked down roster spots. I think Saran Neal left no shadow of a doubt that he's probably going to make the roster as well. He had one whiff on a tackle, but then he had a couple of really nice plays. I think Saran Neal might have knocked Cam Lewis off of the off the roster last night because Cam Lewis coming back from injury, working his way back from injury. One of our big talking points 2 weeks ago was, are the Buffalo Bills going to keep 11 DBs because they don't trust Saran Neal to play the nickel? Like, is Cam Lewis going to have to make the roster and be the fifth safety and the backup nickel and play special teams? Are we going to have to carry all of these DBs? I think maybe Saran Neal might have done enough to give the Bills confidence that in a pitch he could be their backup nickel. And I think they probably also, after the injury, probably feel confident they can get Cam Lewis onto the practice squad. So I think we're back down to 10 DBs there.
Yep.
And then Andy Isabella.
Mm.
You mentioned his name. Could it be Andy Isabella versus Khalil Shakir? And I know that's crazy because Khalil Shakir was a 5th round pick. The Buffalo Bills traded up for him in the 5th round. Most people noted that he shouldn't have been on the board when he was on the board and the Buffalo Bills got him. Everyone saw this as a steal. Khalil Shakir has flashed in parts over the past 2 seasons, but he's also had his downsides. The Bills are doing everything they can. Just like last year, they were doing everything they could with Isaiah Hodgins to try to get him onto this football team. They try to have him as gunner. You mentioned him in the return game. He had another nice catch in the intermediate where he made a nice juke move, cut up field, and had another big yard after the catch gain. I mean, he is playing his ass off, and he is at every box the Buffalo Bills are asking him to check. He is checking. I don't know if you can say the same about Khalil Shakir, but also I think a lot of Khalil Shakir's work has come in practice setting where we don't get to see it more so than on the football field. But Khalil Shakir only 2 snaps or 1 snap with Josh Allen on Saturday. It's gonna be really interesting to see how much he plays this coming weekend when the Buffalo Bills play their next preseason game. But what are your thoughts? Like, is Khalil Shakir on the bubble?
From a strategic standpoint, you signed Andy Isabella off the street, right? I mean, it wasn't like you traded for him. It wasn't like you were really competing for his services, right? So I do think from a strategic standpoint, you probably are going to have the likely chance that if you wanted to keep Andy Isabella on the practice squad, you could. I don't think you'd lose him. Now, he has shown well in the preseason. He was a name when he was drafted, and there was obviously a lot of, a good chatter around him when he came out in the draft from UMass, but he was on the street, right? And I think that if you're the Bills and you're looking at the roster and you're like, well, can we play this out in a way where maybe Khalil Shakir makes the team, Andy Isabella's on the practice squad, and it gets to a point maybe where maybe during the season, if Khalil Shakir is not performing, you potentially make a move. I think it will be a really tough pill for the Bills to swallow to cut Khalil Shakir in favor of Andy Isabella. But sometimes those are the hard decisions that you need to make. Now, I'm not ready to go there yet because I think it's still probably too early and we haven't necessarily seen enough real game reps from Shakir to make that call. But you can't fault Andy Isabella, right? Like, he's done everything, like you said, they've asked him to do. He's been contributing in the return game. He's made some nice plays in the intermediate, as you mentioned. So, again, I think Andy Isabella is really kind of looking at this as like, hey, this is maybe one of my last shots to make it in the NFL and stick with the team. So, as RJ says, I would rather have 7 wide receivers with Isabella and cut one of those 5 linebackers. And I know you're a big proponent of that because you hate the idea of keeping 6 linebackers.
It's going to be absolute groundhog every year, like clockwork. And, the last weekend of August, the first week of September, whenever cut down day is, the Buffalo Bills keep 6 linebackers. They cut a really promising prospect so they can essentially put a practice squad linebacker and have them inactive every week. And the Buffalo Bills lose a promising player. Like, I understand they got Raheem Blackshear back to the practice squad last year. I understand that they got Isaiah Hodgins back to the practice squad last year, but then they ultimately ended up losing them, all the while rostering 7 freaking linebackers on this football team last year. 2 of them played on defense. It's insane. Year after year after year, they roster 6 linebackers. 2 of them play defense. I don't understand it. I would rather redshirt Khalil Shakir and have him inactive every week as our 7th wide receiver and have him back for camp next year when Trent Sherfield's contract is up and Gabe Davis's contract is up, than have freaking Tyrel Dodson or Balon Spector, a guy you could pick up a guy off the street as good as the two of them, and have them sitting on the bench in street clothes every week. I don't get it. That's one of the things. That's one of the decisions that Brandon Beane and Sean McDermott make year after year after year that absolutely baffles me. It blows my mind, and I just can't agree with it.
Yeah, and I think that's why, from a roster construction standpoint, they have a path where both guys are on the team in some capacity, even if they're not both on the 53. I think Isabella would make it to the practice squad, and even if Shakir was on the active. But then it's kind of like you're kind of wasting Andy Isabella. But maybe you kind of see how the linebacker situation plays out, and you cut a guy after week 2 or 3, and you decide you don't need him. Like, that would kind of be how I would maybe play it out. Because I'm with you. I that part of the roster construction, especially when their base defense is 2 linebackers, just always frustrated me.
Speaking of base defense being 2 linebackers, Dorian Williams was once again probably the best linebacker on the field, albeit against backups, albeit playing the off-ball linebacker position, Matt Milano's position. But again, really frustrating that Tyrel Dodson's puking all over himself in the preseason, like we all knew he would. AJ Klein is showing his age, like we all probably knew he would. And you have this young, fast, exciting linebacker flying all over the football field, making really nice stops at the goal line. But the Buffalo Bills are insistent that he's not ready to play inside linebacker, and he's just going to be Matt Milano's backup. How does that make you feel?
Makes me feel like he's going to, if it goes this way, he or Terrell Bernard is going to have to force the Bills' hand in this situation. Like, to me, Tyrel Dodson is shot. Like, I can't get behind it. The antics at practice, like whatever he says on social media, like it just doesn't give me a good vibe. Tyrel Dodson, Balon Spector, there's maybe a place for him to potentially down the road carve out a bit more of a role here. And
who's claiming Balon Spector? That's my question.
And that's what I'm saying. Like, maybe down the road, but like I think the Bills, and I think Greg Tom said, and a couple other people said it well on social media. It's like almost like Terrell Bernard being out, like, helped him win this job, almost like this starting job.
Tyrel Dodson did not race to the finish line. He limped there.
No, he limped there. And but Dorian Williams, like he might be forcing the Bills' hand a bit, and maybe the Bills are just keeping it a little bit close to the vest just to give some mystery to what they might do with this position. But is there a little bit of arrogance here too with the Bills that maybe they were thinking like we can make whatever work here? Defensive coach, we have these young guys, Terrell Bernard, Dorian Williams, like we're going to go against the mold of what what our traditional size Mike was and find some different style of players. Maybe that was something to do with like Sean McDermott's shift. Philosophically, defensively, to more aggressive, and he wanted like faster guy. Like, I don't know, right? I guess we'll see. But Dorian Williams, like we said with Andy Isabella, and like we said with Osiris Torrance, like, I mean, you can't really knock his play at this point for where he's playing compared to his peers right now on the roster. I mean, he has been standing out.
Switching now to offensive tackle depth, the Buffalo Bills they've taken a little bit of a hit at offensive tackle over the past couple of weeks. Brandon Shell has retired. Unfortunately for Tommy Doyle, he is out for the season with just an absolutely brutal knee injury. So the Buffalo Bills are really left with Dion Dawkins and Ryan Vandemark at left tackle, and they are left with Spencer Brown, David Questenberry at right tackle, and then you sort of have Richard Garage there as well, who's had a really promising preseason, but he is a UDFA and he is playing against some backups. So let's start with, what were your thoughts on the performance of Dion Dawkins, which wasn't great? And what was your thoughts on the performance on Saturday of Spencer Brown, which also wasn't great? And then we have a super chat here from Jesus that we're going to get to as well about maybe the Buffalo Bills entering the trade market for an offensive tackle.
Yeah, and that chatter's really picked up steam, especially in the Cover One group chat, and from Cover One posting on Twitter. Greg and others have really taken to that
existence.
Yeah, I mean, here's the thing: like, it wasn't a great game for Dion Dawkins. Anyone could see that. I mean, there were a lot of pressures he gave up, and it clearly wasn't his best game. But as many people have pointed out in the comment section, I think at this point, I'm giving Deion Dawkins the benefit of the doubt. I think come week 1, he'll look back at this game, and maybe this will be a motivation to him to be like, hey, look, I shouldn't have just walked through this game either and put my quarterback in harm's way. So I'll give him the benefit of the doubt. I think he'll bounce back, and I think he'll be okay and good to go by week 1. Spencer Brown, there's a lot of talk about like he's got so much potential and this and that, and he's still continuing to struggle, but like he's been there throughout camp, right? Like he's been healthy this training camp. He hasn't been that great in the preseason thus far. He's been okay. He's probably still the Bills' best option at right tackle, which is a little bit scary. But at the end of the day, it goes back to what really, I mean, both of us are coming saying this has been offensive tackle depth, and really offensive tackle in general is probably one of the weakest position groups on this roster at any position group. And there was no material investment in this position at all during the offseason. Yes, Brandon Shell retired. That was unfortunate, unforeseen. But there was still no investment made really in the draft. Regardless of how the board fell, whatever, you still could have found a way if you were the Bills, and they didn't address it. So now that this is the bed they made, and they have to lie in it, and hopefully maybe we can will into existence some kind of trade or someone out there that could give them a little bit of depth, maybe the equivalent, I'll say, of a Brandon Shell type, right? That's kind of all you can really hope for, I think, at this stage, outside of a trade where you're giving up assets.
Eric Wood, after the game, he posted some really poignant comments on Twitter to maybe just try to like calm some people down, like myself, who were really frustrated with the play of the offensive line on Saturday night. And these were the comments from Eric Wood. He said, I talked in pregame about how tough it was for me to go up against a 34 defense as a rookie after only going up against a 4-man front without game planning for them. You saw some of that from the O-line yesterday. Cullen Jenkins from Green Bay welcomed me to the NFL by baptism. I realized there were penalties on the offensive line, but when you are always playing from bad down and distance, then it becomes really tough to block guys you aren't familiar with. Based on film study, it becomes really hard to pass protect, and we saw that last night. I'm not in freak out mode about our offensive line like most are, but after the Shell retirement and Doyle injury, depth at tackle becomes a big concern. That brought me down a little bit because Deion Dawkins is a pros pro, and even though he has had his struggles the last couple of years, he's always at least been an adequate left tackle, and he did not look good on Saturday night. But here's to hoping that when the lights go on week 1, you'll see some semblance of the Deion Dawkins we've always seen, even if it's not the best of Deion Dawkins we've seen. Spencer Brown, on the other hand, it's a little bit concerning, and what's concerning to me the most, and again, I'm going to save my freak out. I'm going to save all of that for the regular season. When it happens in the regular season, I'll lose my goddamn mind. But until then, my biggest beef right now is we knew that this could happen with Spencer Brown. We knew. And Brandon Beane chose to do literally nothing. If you want to count Brandon Shell, that's fine. Him retiring is not an excuse because you literally did nothing. Brandon Shell's a pretty decent run blocker. He's never been a good pass blocker. Brandon Shell wasn't the issue if Spencer Brown fell flat in his face. We just got done singing the praises of Dorian Williams. I understand that. He's a good football player, but he's your backup weak side linebacker. DeJuan Jones went about 20 picks later. He could be competing for the starting right tackle job right now. He could be.
Yeah. But
we passed. Yeah. Why? Because he was too big. It scared us. That's the only explanation I can think of. They knew, and they chose. And not just that, right? What happens if Deion Dawkins gets hurt? What happens? We saw last year our offense, that game against the Patriots, I know it was Thursday night, it was a short week, but that game where David Quessenberry had to start at left tackle, our offense was just Josh Allen, get the ball out of your hands as quickly as possible, and it was just the most patchwork, good but not good offense I'd have seen from the Buffalo Bills all season, because you could tell if they were playing a different opponent that wasn't the New England Patriots, it wouldn't have been an acceptable game with Deion Dawkins out of the lineup. So I'm really concerned about this offensive tackle depth.
Do you think that there could be a better late than never scenario, maybe this offseason where they finally say, like, we're going to draft it or sign a big money tackle, right tackle potentially, because as many people have been pointing out, Jason Suggs says right here, DeJuan Jones was staring us in the face in round 3, just like last year when Dylan Parham was staring us the face in round 3 and the Bills drafted Terrell Bernard. DeJuan Jones staring us in the face in round 3 and the Bills drafted Dorian Williams. Now, they have their guys ranked. I'm not the GM, so clearly, like, my preference does not matter at all to Brandon Beane, or really any of our preferences don't matter to him. However, it's 2 years in a row now where an investment looked like it would line up with a need, and the Bills passed and instead went for an undersized linebacker. So,
and here's the thing,
a little bit of a head scratcher.
Yeah, cool. It could be nice if in the 2024 offseason the Buffalo Bills make that move, but we talk about the season being over if Josh Allen gets hurt. Season could be over if Deion Dawkins gets hurt, right? I mean, because then you're talking about moving Spencer Brown to left tackle and starting David Questenberry at right tackle, or you're starting Ryan Vandermark at left tackle, and he's looked promising. Don't get me wrong, but you don't know what it's going to look like when the live bullets start flying. So that brings us to Jesus' super chat, and I apologize, Jesus, for taking so long to get to it. He says the Bills signed an offensive tackle, linebacker, and running back today. No one polarizing. Do you think a Bills trade for at least a serviceable offensive tackle or linebacker before game 1? And the reason why I'm bringing it up now and not the next segment, we're going to be venting about linebackers, is because other than Jack Sanborn, I don't really see any linebackers out there in the trade market from a team that's not possibly in contention. But there are a number of options, I think, at offensive tackle where it's not DeJuan Jones, right? It's not a guy we could have gotten in free agency if we had decided to allocate our resources elsewhere. It's not any of that. But there are 3 guys to me that stick out. 2 of them are on the Arizona Cardinals, one of them being Josh Jones, who's going into the last year of his contract. He's a guy who I think would be not so much competition for Spencer Brown because, living out here in the desert, I hear the way people talk about some of these players, and Josh Jones, he's kind of got that Cyrus Kouandjio type of issue where he's only good on one side of the line, and that side happens to be the left side of the line, playing left guard and left tackle. So, I mean, he'd be a nice maybe backup to Deion Dawkins if Deion Dawkins gets hurt, but I don't know if he solves your issue if Spencer Brown falls flat in his face. Maybe the Buffalo Bills can get something more out of him on the right side. But the other one from the Arizona Cardinals is Kelvin Beachum. He's a little bit older of a prospect, obviously 34 years old, but he's been there, done that in the league. He's a true sling tackle. He's played left tackle in this league. He's played right tackle in this league. He's been an iffy run blocker throughout his entire career, but you know what he's always done? He's always protected his quarterback. To me, Kelvin Beachum is the dude that the Buffalo Bills should be pursuing. Larry Borum of the Chicago Bears is the other option that a lot of people have pointed out. And there's also Jason Peters, 41-year-old Jason Peters, sitting out there in free agency. Jones, Beachum, Borum, Peters. Any of those guys tickle your fancy, Dave?
For me, it would be Beachum. I just to me, I think, I mean, I know Bills Mafia loves to get attached to their guys. And I think that, look, I get the appeal of a guy like Jason Peters, but in reality, we really need someone who can come in and play right tackle. I mean, Jason Peters is over 40 years old. I believe he's 41, right? If I'm not mistaken. And I don't know how much good football he really has left in him. For me, it would be Beachum. I think just the combination of like his ability to potentially come in, be a steadying presence. He's got that experience to play that side. And I think he's got a little bit more stability than a guy like Josh Jones, although, like you mentioned, does have that direct backup potential to Dawkins and younger, but I feel like Beachum for this season would be more valuable. So out of those 3 guys, I feel like Beacham's a nice middle ground and is probably the guy I would want the most out of those 3. And I also don't know that he's going to cost you a ton in a trade.
Yeah.
Like it's not like he's a starter for the Cardinals. So
That's the question, though, right? So
Yeah.
now we get to the question, and the question is the cost.
The cost, right?
The Buffalo Bills have obviously hoarded a bunch of later round picks. They got a bunch of late round picks to play with. We got to remember that like Russell Bodine has gotten a 7th round picks in the past. Marshall Newhouse has gotten a 7th round picks in the past. Kelvin Beachum is a cut above that. So Kelvin
Yes.
Beachum is probably and especially the fact that there's a sense of urgency. There might actually even be a bidding war for his services by a couple of teams. He might get more than what better players like. We saw like really good offensive linemen getting traded this offseason for like 5th round picks because teams are just trying to dump their contracts. I think Kelvin Beachum might get more than some of those players just because it's the sense of urgency, people looking for for a player late in the game, etc., especially contender teams like the Buffalo Bills. But I'd be as willing to go as high as a 5th round pick. A 4th round pick would be a little rich for my blood. And in order to lower the draft pick compensation for a Kelvin Beachum, or hell, maybe even get a draft pick back, right?
Mm-hmm.
The Buffalo Bills could consider adding a player to a deal. Khalil Shakir, Boogie Basham, right? Like some people have thrown out Kyrie Elam. I don't want to throw out Kyrie Elam. That's not something that we're going to have a conversation about. Like someone said Kyrie Elam and for Calvin Beachum in a 3rd round pick, I would do it. No, I wouldn't personally. That's them saying they would do it. Too early for me on that. But other guys like Boogie Basham, guys like Khalil Shakir, are there any players on this team that might have some value that you would be willing to dangle for an offensive lineman like a Calvin Beachum?
I think I'd be willing to dangle Boogie Basham. I mean, I actually thought Boogie Basham had a couple
Because
nice
Arizona's
reps.
got no good players, so
Yeah.
they're
and
good. Like
and I think
any position will work.
any position will do for the Arizona Cardinals. I think Boogie Basham had a couple good reps in the Steelers game actually, and he's had a decent camp. He's
Yeah.
got one more year left after this on his contract, so that's appealing for a team, right? Looking to make a trade, 2nd round pick, pretty decently consensusly scouted, like a day 2 guy in that draft, right? I know he's 2nd, 3rd, like pretty solid player, right? And he's got some tools to work with, and the Bills really do right now. In the situation they're in with AJ Epinesa kind of coming on, Von Miller coming back. They have Leonard Floyd signed this year. Unless they really envision Boogie Basham maybe making a significant step to a true contributing, like high-end contributing role next year, it's worth a dangle, right? If you feel like Kelvin Beachum in 2023 is really going to help your team more and the protection of Josh Allen than what you're going to get in a rotational snap package with Boogie Basham, who's maybe your 4th or 5th defensive end. That's pretty appealing to me. Shakir, I would be a little more hesitant on, right? I think you probably don't have to offer as much with Shakir if you're going to do that, or even anything more potentially.
Yeah.
But I'd be a little more hesitant to
Could
do
be a
that
swap.
just because of the guys coming off the books next year, right? Gabe Davis, you don't know what's going to happen. Andy Isabella's only here maybe for a few more weeks. We don't even know. Sherfield's only on the 1-year deal. Hardy has a year after this one, but that's it, right? And then it's Stephon Diggs. So I'd be a little bit more hesitant to dangle Shakir.
I'll tell you what, I wouldn't do this for Josh Jones because I mentioned my misgivings with him, left side only. I wouldn't do this for Larry Borum, but for Kelvin Beachum, I said it earlier. If Deion Dawkins gets hurt, this season's over just as much as it is if Josh Allen got hurt. Kelvin Beachum's got that left-right flex. He's a pretty solid pass blocker, always has been. Spencer Brown falls flat in his face. Kelvin Beachum is a plug-and-play right tackle. You need to protect Josh Allen to be successful. I think Kelvin Beachum, as odd as it sounds, right? Like as odd, some 34-year-old veteran hanging onto his last legs type of swing tackle. He could be a make or break addition to the roster if certain things happen, like Brown falls on his face or Deion Dawkins gets hurt. I'm willing to part with a depth receiver in Khalil Shakir if the Buffalo Bills don't think he'll ever be anything more than a depth receiver. I'm willing to part with a depth rotational edge rusher in Boogie Basham if the Buffalo Bills feel like he'll never be anything more than a depth rotational pass rusher or edge rusher. I'd be willing to deal either one of those players plus a late round draft pick for Kelvin Beachum. I know I caught a lot of flack from people for saying that, but protect your quarterback first. I think it's
Yeah.
easier to find depth receivers. Like, look, Andy Isabella popped up out of nowhere. Keyshawn Johnson is having a good preseason. Desmond Patman is having a good, like, you can find wide receivers. As much as I love Khalil Shakir, you can find wide receivers. Getting an offensive tackle of Kelvin Beachum's ability and having him there as a security blanket,
That's a good point.
to me, I don't want to play no games. I don't want to play no games. This is really weird too, right? Like, I'm at the point where if we don't get Kelvin Beachum, I'm going to be sad. And I'm probably going to be sad because there aren't even any reports that he's even on the trade block. Like, like none. I have just manifested this into existence. Like, now there are Arizona Cardinals like beat guys who are retweeting my tweets about trying to manifest a Kelvin Beachum trade. That's how far I've taken this thing. I mean, the guy's 34 years old. Maybe he loves it in Arizona and doesn't mind being a backup to Paris Johnson Jr., right? Like, maybe he doesn't want to get traded. Like, there are all these other things that could go into it. So Kelvin Beachum might not even be on the trade block. But I'm definitely going to be disappointed if the Buffalo Bills don't add there, because right now it is Dawkins and Vandemark at left tackle. It is Brown and Questenberry at right tackle. That's it. And then you have Richard Garage to throw into that equation as well. I don't think he's going to usurp Vandermark at left tackle where he's been playing. And I don't think they're going to flip him over to the right side now to compete with David Questenberry. So Richard Garage looks like he's going to be going to the practice squad. It's Questenberry that sticks out like the sore thumb to me. I mean, he got worked by that Wisconsin edge rusher whose name is escaping me right now.
Herbig, Nate
Herbig, yeah, just absolutely just torched. Yeah. So it'll be really interesting to see how that plays out. All right, let's transition to the other heart attack inducing position on the Buffalo Bills roster, and that is the glaring hole at inside linebacker. Tyrel Bernard is still working his way back from a hamstring injury. Tyrel Dodson has been getting in fights in camp, getting torched in preseason games. We saw it again against the Steelers, taking bad angles on that Jaylen Warren run. You definitely, I'm not saying it's Tyrel Dodson's fault, but you definitely could tell on that Kenny Pickett touchdown pass to Pat Freiermuth. That pass isn't getting made if Tremaine Edmonds is out there being a pterodactyl in the middle of the football field with his long arms and his giant frame. So, teams don't have qualms about ripping those ones over the middle of the field against guys like Tyrel Dodson and Matt Milano. AJ Klein came into the game, showed his age, missed a tackle in the open field on a running back. So again, this is another situation where the Buffalo Bills knew that there was really nothing there at the position outside of hopes and wishes. Yet they decided not to address the position. They drafted another weak side linebacker.
Yep.
It looks like it's probably going to be AJ Klein week 1, which is something I started to call on social media about a week and a half ago. I saw it coming. I knew it was coming. I knew when Tyrel Dodson was getting in fights in camp, he was getting frustrated because he was sucking. I knew exactly why he was doing it.
And he didn't swing his helmet. He tossed it back to somebody. Okay.
So I read the tea leaves. I saw this coming. I made that prediction. Then sure enough, they rotated and Tyrel Dodson was in there in the fourth quarter of a preseason game. It looks like it's going to be AJ Klein's job to start. I think the Buffalo Bills love AJ Klein between the years. I think the Buffalo Bills understand that maybe as an athlete, AJ Klein probably doesn't have it anymore. And that's why I think that probably by week 2 or 3, you're going to see Tyrel Bernard finally work his way into the lineup from injury at middle linebacker. But what are your thoughts on this situation at middle linebacker? Because again, it's frustrating because we knew.
And the frustrating thing about it is the competition really hasn't made things any clearer, right? Training camp, preseason, still just as many questions as we had going into camp. No one's really separated themselves. I mean, I do think that there has been promising play from Dorian Williams, but we heard going into camp from the coaching staff that was basically not going to be an option for him to play the middle. So, okay, but now he has played the middle in a couple of the preseason games, late in games. So, like, what are we talking about here? Like, he's getting reps at the mic in some of these games. So AJ Klein seems like the betting favorite to start the season, especially if Terrell Bernard's injury lingers over into week 1 and beyond. I think the Bills would like to get Terrell Bernard back sooner rather than later, because this could be a situation where by week 7 or 8, you might be on your third starting middle linebacker potentially, right? If you have AJ Klein coming in week 1 or 2, maybe Terrell Bernard gets a crack when he comes back, and who knows how he'll do, and maybe the Bills do end up giving a shot to Dorian Williams at some point. But this is something that we are going to feel this season. I mean, I hate to break it to Bills Mafia, but we're going to feel the loss of Tremaine Edmonds, as much as a lot of people maybe didn't think he was great. Obviously, weren't going to pay him that $72 million contract, but we're going to miss him.
Yeah.
I'll say that we are going to miss him.
And it's crazy. I've been so enraged that I've been trying to wrap my head around it for 2 days now. Like, what the hell were the Buffalo Bills thinking? And the only thing I can come up with is this. The Buffalo Bills, I think, walked out of the first round of the draft this year with the best possible player they could have. I think home run, slam dunk. I think they got a really good football player. But when you look at that football player, he was a luxury. The only thing that I can think of that makes sense is the Buffalo Bills didn't want to walk out of the first round of this year's NFL draft with the best player. They wanted to walk out of this year's first round with the best fit, but that fit went to the Detroit Lions about 8 picks before the Buffalo Bills thought. I think the only thing that makes sense is the Buffalo Bills thought they had Jack Campbell in the bag.
Yeah.
It's the only thing that makes sense, because none of the other linebackers, we had this discussion. I pulled up a clip from one of our pre-draft shows. There was literally 0 other players in this draft. Zero. That were traditional middle linebackers like the way Jack Campbell is.
Yep.
Everyone else was like, well, they're kind of an edge rusher. They're kind of a weak side linebacker. They're kind of this. They're kind of that. They're kind of an overhang player. Jack Campbell was like, nope, every box the Buffalo Bills need. Check. He was the only one. Only one. I really do think that maybe the Buffalo Bills wanted to walk out of the first round with him, even though Dalton Kincaid's a better player. It just got thrown amok when the Detroit Lions selected him. That's the only thing I can think of. Drew Tranquill went to Kansas City to be their third linebacker for like $3 million. Like, for nothing, for pennies. There were veterans on the street that have more athleticism, more in the tank than AJ Klein left. The Buffalo Bills did not sign them. The Buffalo Bills decided to allocate their money to guys like Deontay Hardy and to other players. The money that they did have to play with, to other players, they choose not to spend it on middle linebacker. You mentioned it could have been arrogance. Maybe it was arrogance. I don't know. But the Buffalo Bills are paying the price now. So now we get into, where do we go from here? You mentioned it, Terrell Bernard. Again, not a traditional middle linebacker. So it'll be really interesting to see once he gets onto the football field. Maybe he practices this week. And if he practices this week, maybe he plays on this weekend. Maybe the Buffalo Bills want to get him out in the football field. If he is, that's the only thing I'll be watching. I'm not even going to watch the offense. I'm just going to watch the defense. And then when the offense is on the field, I'm just going to rewind and rewatch the defense, because all my eyes will be on Terrell Bernard if he does play this weekend. AJ Klein, and then the Taylor Rapp equation, right? The Buffalo Bills could be playing more dime this season, I think, than they've ever played in their history, just because they're going to have to do something. And then the green dot comes into the equation as well. Rotating a green dot on and off the football field does not sound like a recipe for success.
No, I mean, especially when you have these younger players, like, you figure the fewer variables you put into the equation, the better, right? Like, you just don't want to add complications to a team, and like, not necessarily on defense, but has already shown not a ton of discipline and not a ton of, not a ton of sharpness on pre-snap situations. Now, albeit a lot of that's been on the offense, but defense as well. There have been some issues as well pre-snap. So look, I mean, this whole situation is going to really manifest itself, and we'll figure out what this really means for the Bills come week 1, because time is running out, and there's not, like, you're going to have to work with what you've got right now if you're the Buffalo Bills, most likely at linebacker, and like, you've got to figure something out. And Sean McDermott, there's pressure now, even more so on Sean McDermott to make this work, because there's not a scapegoat anymore, right? Like, and Brandon Beane isn't going to be the scapegoat to Sean McDermott at this point with the personnel. Now, we can criticize Brandon Beane in the draft draft approach, and there is some criticism warranted there, but there's nothing we can do now about it. So the Bills need to figure this out. If that means that Sean McDermott's going to have to swallow his pride a bit and give Dorian Williams a chance at middle linebacker, so be it, right? If it comes down to that. So we will see.
Bill's Fever comes in, says Kincaid was far from a luxury pick. Walter S. follows up and says, it's not like middle linebackers winning us playoff games and slowing down scoring in our defense. You got to keep giving up 27 plus points in the playoffs. We need more offense. A couple other people saying like we needed Walter S., this was the comment that I meant to pull up, said we had a desperate need for a slot player like Dalton Kincaid. So yeah, maybe I put my foot in my mouth a little bit with that comment. Spin comes in and says, I'd rather have Kincaid than Campbell. I agree. I'm
agree.
completely content with who our first round pick was. I'm not complaining about who our first round pick was. I'm trying to figure out how the Buffalo Bills got to this situation. I'm trying to figure out how we got here. And it's just super frustrating because they're drafting these off-ball linebackers that can't play middle linebacker. They're not adding a traditional middle linebacker. It doesn't make any sense what's going on. Somebody comes up in the comment section and said Anthony Barr, ? Richard Greenwood comes in and says Anthony Barr. I know Joe Marino has been pumping up Anthony Barr for a while now. I've always thought of Anthony Barr more as like a strong side linebacker, more so than a middle linebacker. It'll be really interesting. I mean, he could be a player that could come in and play a role, but it would certainly be a rotational role. I don't think he'd be an every down player. And now we get into the green dot issue again for the Buffalo Bills. So it's just frustrating. It is really, really frustrating. I don't see the trade targets at middle linebacker the way I see the trade targets at off the tackle. The only one that I could come up with was Jack Sanborn from Chicago. How ironic would it be that we have to make a trade with Chicago to get their middle linebacker that they replaced with the guy that we let go in Tremaine Edmonds. So, and even then, I mean, what's it going to cost? Because Jack Sanborn is a young, promising player. I know he's probably not a starter for the Bears anymore, but he's a great depth piece. And it's not exactly like Chicago thinks they're a doormat. They might end up being a doormat, but they don't think they're a doormat. So they're not going to want to trade some of their depth pieces. It's going to cost the Buffalo Bills a pretty penny. In our Cover One group chat today, I think somebody brought it up. The Chicago Bears tried to sign Ryan Bates to an offer sheet a couple of seasons ago. Would you trade Ryan Bates for Jack Sanborn? My answer to that was hell no. Hell no. So as desperate as I am for a middle linebacker, I don't think I'd be willing to trade any rosterable players on our team for one. So it's going to be really interesting to see how the Buffalo Bills scheme around their lack of a traditional inside linebacker.
Yeah, and I mean, size-wise, Balin Spector is the guy that has the size, but he's fallen so far down the depth chart at this point that doesn't seem realistic at this juncture. Maybe like way down the road during the season, but
to me, I think Bernard is the easy answer, right? It's AJ Klein holding down the fort until Terrell Bernard is ready. But if it were me, and this is why I'm not in charge of a National Football League team, because I'd be hitting the panic button a lot. I'd be hitting the panic button. And Dorian Williams has worked mostly at outside linebacker all of training camp. If it was me, I'd be kicking somebody else out to outside linebacker. Tyrel Dodson, you're going out and you're the backup weak side linebacker now. Or Traven Howard, you're the backup weak side linebacker. Or Balin Spector, you're the backup. I would kick one of the other 500 linebackers that we're going to roster this year to be Matt Milano's primary backup. And I would just have Dorian Williams in practice exclusively working at middle linebacker. Because if he's not ready now, maybe he might be ready week 5 or week 6 or week 7. Because again, this issue could really come up and it could really haunt the Buffalo Bills. So that'll be really interesting to see how that plays out. All right, to close things out this evening, the Buffalo Bills. Injury bug hit. The Buffalo Bills lost a couple of players. Obviously, Tommy Doyle is out for the year with an ACL injury. That really stinks. Shane Ray, it looks like his career as a Buffalo Bill is over. He was placed on IR today. He'll likely be bought out with an injury settlement, and he'll either go back to the CFL or maybe another team will try to pick him up. And in their place, the Buffalo Bills added a couple of intriguing names. A guy that they brought back after 2 previous stints with the Buffalo Bills. This is a guy who was a first-team All-XFL player last year. That's off the tackle Garrett McGinn. They brought in Ty Johnson, the running back. Pretty explosive, pretty good stats. I think 5.3 yards per carry average last season. Plus, he's a good kick returner. We can get to Ty Johnson conversation in a moment. And they added Deshaun White, another undersized, 6 foot, 220 pound linebacker out of Oklahoma. He was at rookie camp. He didn't sign with the Buffalo Bills, but now the Buffalo Bills do bring him in this late in the game. It is likely that 2 of these 3 guys are just going to be playing on Saturday, and then we'll never hear from them again. And Garrett McGinn and Deshaun White. But I think Ty Johnson could have some practice squad potential. I think he's a really good football player who sustained an off the field injury. The Jets cut him because of that off the field injury. And I think if not for that, a team would have scooped him up a lot sooner. He's a pretty quality running back.
He's a quality running back, and I think the way that whole situation played out with the Jets just felt off to being.
I think it was our jabroni of the week one week.
Yeah, and I like Ty Johnson. I think that when he got chances to play with the Jets over the last couple of years, he acquitted himself pretty well, right? He had some nice moments. He's a good receiver. He's got speed, obviously coming back from injury, but there are worse options to find this late in the game, right before the season starts, especially with the Bills looking at this like, okay, Damian Harris, he's been kind of slow to recover, I would say, but like they expect probably him to be back by week 1. But Ty Johnson gives them a little bit more of that like Nyheim Hines style type of player, I would say. Whereas like right now they have like James Cook, Latavius Murray, Damian Harris, Latavius Murray, Damian Harris, maybe similar type of players. They don't really have the guy that's kind of stylistically necessarily like James Cook, because I don't think guys like Jordan Mims are going to make the team by any chance. But Ty Johnson as a practice squad guy could be interesting, and it could be used in a pinch as well in the return game. So I like Ty Johnson.
Yeah, I like Ty Johnson as well. I think that, Darrington Evans, who's had a good preseason so far, like he could be in trouble now because I think Ty Johnson is quite frankly better.
And Darrington Evans didn't have a great game on Saturday either.
Yeah, bigger frame. Same Jordan Mims, like he's a UDFA. I know you love Jordan Mims. I like Jordan Mims coming out of Fresno State, but you now have a chance to roster James Cook, Damian Harris, and Latavius Murray, and you now have Ty Johnson, who could possibly be waiting on your practice squad. The guy who can come in, he can return kicks. He's got experience as a pass protector. He's played some games in this league. Damian Harris was hurt all last year, and now he's got a soft tissue injury, or not a soft tissue injury, but a knee injury, and he has been out as well. So Ty Johnson's a guy who could make the practice squad, be this year's version of Duke Johnson, and if an injury happens, Ty Johnson's legitimately a name player who could be a factor for the Buffalo Bills offense this season, as odd as it sounds. So I'm not going to say he's like a Nyheim Hines replacement because I don't think he's as good as Nyheim Hines, but hey, now the Buffalo Bills have another like adult in the room at running back. They got 4 again. They got 4 adults in the room again. So it'll be really interesting and really intriguing to see if they can sneak him onto the practice squad, which is my guess is they'll be able to do. Garrett McGinn, I hope he enjoys his paycheck. Same with Deshaun White. Maybe one of those guys can work their way into the practice squad, but offensive line, I'll tell you what, I think the three guys on the offensive line are set for the practice squad. At least if they keep more than 3, they keep more than 3. But I think it's going to be Richard Grage at tackle. I think it's going to be Nick Broker at guard. And then Alec Anderson at guard center. I think that's the Buffalo Bills practice squad for
a nice trio.
Line. Yeah, it's like a nice trio of developmental guys. It'll be interesting to see if anyone else can maybe work their way. Maybe they keep a vet like a Greg Manx, or maybe Ike Bucker. They keep a 4th guy, but Ike Bucker got worked in that 1 rep. That's all I remember from him this preseason. So it'll be really interesting to see. All right. Before we close out here this evening, ladies and gentlemen, Dave, any sort of final thoughts on the week that was in Bills Mafia?
Rewatching that game made me realize how bad local announcers are. They called Jordan Poyer Jimmy Boner or something. I think they
Kyer Elam was Kyer Elam.
Yep, and they called. This is common even amongst Bills Mafia, but they called Kingsley Jonathan Kingsley, which I understand that to an extent. But they Jordan Poyer, they called him like Johnny Boner or something. It was just something funny. But those Steeler announcers were like, the local announcers are bad. And that's what's always funny about watching the preseason to me, is like all these like replays are the local announcers, and like
Mhm.
you just kind of see like how much you really need to appreciate guys like Jim Nantz and even like Kevin
Yeah.
Harlan and these guys that do this every week are really, really good. So to me, that's always entertaining.
Did you happen to see the Stephen A. Smith commentary today
I
on
did. I was gonna.
ESPN's First Take?
I was
Were you, were
gonna.
you gonna ignore it?
I was gonna ignore it. Yeah, I was gonna ignore
I
it.
just find it so funny. Like it's and good for Stephon Diggs too, because it's honestly refreshing to hear a player just be like, "Yeah, that guy's full of shit." Like that guy's
Yep.
just so. Like, Steve, you're Stephen A. Smith, and you make $9 million a year with whatever shtick it is that you have. And I'll
Mhm.
tell you what, like even though he's not like, I don't want to say he's not the most like he's not some X's and O's guru, right? But I genuinely enjoy listening to Stephen A. Smith talk about the NBA. I enjoy it. I think he's an entertaining guy. I think he has good takes for the most part. I know he's not the X's and O's expert that like a JJ Redick would be when talking about basketball, right? I I just I need these guys I need these networks to stop putting guys into conversations about sports that aren't theirs, right? Like
Mhm.
we had this problem a couple of years ago with Chris Broussard when he thought that Taylor Lewan was the left tackle for the Buffalo Bills, right? Like
Yeah.
it's embarrassing. They pay all these guys all this money so they feel like they need to talk about every single sport. They don't. They
They don't.
really do not.
They
Like
don't.
and Stephen A was trying to flex his muscles today and show that he's a football guy and show that he has sources in the NFL just like he does in the NBA. So he decided to go for the low-hanging fruit and just make up a story that Stephon Diggs is miserable in Buffalo, that he's all talk, that he in reality he wants out, but he's stuck here. Stephon Diggs comes right in and just throws it right in his face today. And for a guy who is cryptic as Stephon Diggs is, for him to be so blunt and for him to
Mhm.
be so just upfront about how much bullshit that was
Mhm.
really enjoyable to watch on social from afar today. Cause I'm, back to my day job. Don't get to sit there and scroll social media like I usually do. Looking from afar, scamming my phone. I was giggling quite a few times today. Whenever I got a chance to look at my phone.
Yeah, and that's why it's nice. I think you really hit it on the head there with Stephon Diggs and the way he traditionally kind of approaches social media. And this was like the
Mhm.
opposite of that. It was like, bro, like, what are you doing? And then, um, I actually, I had kind of been like coming around to Stephen A little bit,
Yeah.
and then like this
I
happened, and now he's just down that
I
list
find
again.
his shtick making fun of the Cowboys entertaining. I always
That
like,
I love
a-
that. I
and
do love
again,
that.
like I'm very much a guy who um, doesn't like the riffraff, the minutia, right? That comes with. I like sports talk. I like it when they talk about freaking sports. I don't like it when they get like too off track. But that's one of the things that I thoroughly do enjoy, is when Stephen A. Smith just clowns on whatever cowboy they bring on a Monday morning after the Cowboys. I was when that's some of the non like serious stuff that I do enjoy. I think the Monday night countdown booth might be entertaining this year.
Mhm.
They got Scott Van Pelt
Yep.
replacing Susie Colbert. I love Susie Colbert. Susie Colbert was great, but there's Scott Van Pelt has always been the OG and one of my favorite just hosts of anything. And he always does a great job with Ryan Clark, who is now the other co-host of Monday Night Countdown. And the way Scott Van Pelt and Ryan Clark sort of waded the waters and handled the DeMar Hamlin situation, it was they should win awards for that, right? Like as awful as that situation was, and as much as we didn't want them to ever be in that situation, or give them the sports Emmys, whatever. That coverage, the way that they handled that situation was incredible. So the nuance of those two guys and Ryan Clark, he's had some misfires this offseason, especially regarding the Bills, but Van Pelt and Clark to go along with Swagoo and Robert Griffin III, who's kind of a clown. I'm just going to put it on mute whenever he's on. That's a pretty decent Monday Night Countdown, and it got Booger McFarland off our televisions, which is a win, I think, in everyone's book.
Well, you put RG3 in for Booger, you're gonna what like is that an improvement? I don't know, but like Steve
Uh,
Young was awful. I mean, I never enjoyed him.
mhm.
I'm sure Schefter will still be on there for his shtick and all that, but I mean, give it to Scott Van Pelt, right? I mean, like the ESPN's been
They're getting their money's worth there too.
Getting rid of talent, and like he's like one of the last guys standing right at the mothership. So it's like
he's probably getting you $50 million.
He's probably getting paid a ton because
they literally built him a studio in Washington D.C. because that's his hometown.
Yep,
they just built him a studio to do. I don't watch a lot of network television anymore, especially network like when I turn on ESPN, I turn it on for live sports. I don't turn it on for NFL Live. Is relatively intriguing. They got some personalities there. Amina Kayam, Stan Orlovsky. It's fun. It's lighthearted. I enjoy it. And the Midnight Sports Center with Scott Van Pelt is still good. It's still good. Especially out here on the West Coast when it's 9 o'clock Sports Center, not the Midnight Sports Center. It's even better. Before we head out here, we got Silas Whittle coming to the Super Chat. I always appreciate you, Silas. Very generous donation to us this evening. He says, I'm holding MFers' feet to the fire. I'm tired of all these non-Bills fans talking about the stuff going on inside of One Bills Drive like they have sources. Their sources are as real as Peter Pan and the Tooth Fairy. Go Bills. And I'll tell you what,
love that.
And I do. I'm going to keep that up there for a little bit. But this is the sign that you're good, right? Right? Like no one was talking about nobody was talking about Lee Evans. When Lee Evans wanted out of Buffalo, or when Peerless Price wanted out of Buffalo, it wasn't the news that Stephon Diggs reportedly wanting out of Buffalo, even though he doesn't want out of Buffalo is, right? Like the drama at One Bills Drive has always been there. It's there with every team. It just gets amplified when you're good.
Right. Yeah, I mean, totally. And like Lee Evans, like how many post game interviews at his locker room did he just look miserable? I mean, because he's basically going to either get an 85-yard touchdown from JP Lossman or he was going to get nothing. Yeah. So it's like, times have changed, right? And like Lee Evans was kind of like right before sort of social media and all that kind of stuff really kicked off into high gear, in like kind of the late 2000s. But in this era where everything is so instantaneous and every little sort of reaction gets analyzed by thousands and thousands of people, it's just tough, right? Sometimes because you're never there's never going to be a situation where 100% of people will either understand what your intentions are or take your side. And that's just the reality of the world we live in right now. So,
all right, Dave, before we get up, me and you are in this underdog fantasy league here at Cover One.
Yeah,
we're up by the way.
We're up.
So in our underdog fantasy league, I got the 11th pick and Dave got the 12th pick. So we have we control the next 4 picks. Do we want to do our picks live on air here? Do you got your phone handy?
Yeah, we
want to
do
this live on air here. I'll tell you what, I'm debating between 2 guys. I'm not going to tell you who I'm debating, but I'm going to take Saquon Barkley with my pick here. So I'm going to make my 11th pick Saquon Barkley. Hopefully he plays. So you can look and see who's on the board. The number 1 rated player left on the board is AJ Brown, CeeDee Lamb. I'm on Ross St. Brown. It'll be interesting. Let's see who you're going to go with here.
Don't love these options, to be honest. But this is best ball. So I am going to go for maybe a little bit of a swing here. But you know what? I think I'm gonna, with this 12th and 13th. I don't love the options, but I might have to double dip on wide receiver here potentially.
Ooh, please don't. One of my guys with my next pick was going to be a wide receiver, but I'm not going to say who it was in hopes that you don't pick them. You probably will.
Half point per reception, ceiling guys. You know what? I'm going double dip at wide receiver. I'm going to go ahead and take AJ Brown and CeeDee Lamb are going to be my picks.
My guy did not get taken. I'm taking Garrett Wilson.
Yep.
I got the New Jersey. I don't know if I can name my team, but I'm naming it the New Jersey somethings because I got Garrett Wilson and I got Saquon Barkley now.
I am playing the format. The rosters are 3. You have 3 wide receivers in this, 2 running backs and a flex. So I wanted to get a couple receivers there. Don't love picking at the end of the round. Never feels good. But with best ball, I feel like AJ Brown and CeeDee Lamb give pretty good ceilings. for best ball. So I'm hoping that will
Mhm.
be an asset to me.
Fluffy Panda comes in with the super chat, and we'll finish it off with the super chat here. He says, "Worst case scenario, knock on wood, because this is not going to happen." He says, "Forgive me for asking. You are forgiven, Fluffy Panda." He says, "If we do miss the playoffs this year, is that curtains for Bean and McDermott, especially with Allen in his prime?" To me, it'd have to depend on how ugly it was, right? Like if we're talking absolute team quits, everything looks like crap. Draft picks are looking awful, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Maybe. I think the more likely scenario that you would see if the Buffalo Bills don't make the playoffs in 2023 is that Sean McDermott will go from not being on the hot seat because he just got his extension to on the hot seat. You'll see a defensive coordinator brought in to take the load off of Sean McDermott. You'll see a new offensive coordinator brought in to reinvigorate the offense. So I think you'll see changes to the coaching staff, but I do not think, unless the absolute worst happens, I don't think Sean McDermott or Brandon Beane are on the hot seat this year. I think they could put themselves on the hot seat, though, if they don't make the playoffs.
I think missing the playoffs would certainly be a dent in their in that. But I also kind of think about those Saints teams, right? That had Drew Brees, with Sean Payton as the head coach, Mickey Loomis as the GM, that they had a couple seasons there. Like the NFC South for a while was like a new team won the division every year for a while, if you remember that. And there were some years the Saints didn't make the playoffs with Drew Brees and some good players on those teams. Marcus Colston, Jimmy Graham. Obviously, they had Pierre Thomas at one point, Mark Ingram. Like they had some good teams that didn't make the playoffs. So like my head kind of goes there into thinking about like the Brandon Beane sort of Sean McDermott combination. I kind of think about that Sean Payton, Mickey Loomis combination there and this with the Saints for a long time. But again, that's just me. I think the leash is super long, and 1 year of missing the playoffs. I think, the Saints won a Super Bowl, but I agree with that. But it took a while before Sean Payton won the Super Bowl with New Orleans.
The Super Bowls get you a long leash too, because Harbaugh in Baltimore is the same way, and Tomlin in Pittsburgh is the same way as well. So even though Sean McDermott doesn't have the hardware,
only took Sean Payton 4 seasons. I take that back. It was his 4th season as a head coach. They won the Super Bowl.
I will say this: even though he does not have the hardware that Tomlin, Harbaugh, and Payton do, I think that Sean McDermott has ingrained himself into this franchise, especially with owner Terry Pegula, which is what matters, the way that a head coach who has won a championship has. Maybe, breaking a 17-year playoff drought is like sort of an equivalent of winning a title, and it buys you said time, right? Maybe hitting on a franchise quarterback right away buys you said time. So it'll be really interesting to see, how it plays out this season. Hopefully we don't have to worry about that, because hopefully we make the playoffs, hopefully we win the Super Bowl, and we're all just celebrating and laughing at this conversation. But before we head out, Silas Whittle, who doing the Lord's work on Twitter, by the way, or X, whatever you want to call it, he's just a menace in these spaces. I know that me and you avoid spaces. We don't like to go into spaces, but our guy Kevin Masseri loves to go into spaces, and he says that Silas Whittle is the king of
I always
spaces.
see Silas spaces on the top of mine.
Dude, I don't think Silas sleeps. I think Silas just lives in Twitter spaces. He comes in and says, "I can't wait for the Buffalo to start kicking the fecal matter out of teams this season. I will be a menace on Twitter all season long. Embrace the hate." Go follow Silas on Twitter, by the way. If you are someone who wants to engage in a conversation, even when there's not a show like this here on Cover One, head on over to Twitter Spaces and follow Silas and have that conversation in his Twitter Spaces. Because, like I said, he's doing the Lord's work. He's in a menace in those spaces, representing Bills Mafia against all those Jets fans, all those Dolphins fans. I think he was going at it with a Ravens fan today. He's just going at it with everybody over there on the Twitter Spaces. So thank you guys so much. Again, our challenge for you this week is, once the show is over, head on over to the comment section and comment on this video with your biggest concern heading into week 1. It really helps us with the algorithm. It really helps us reach a bigger audience. Is if when this video is over, you guys just go in and like the video and just leave us a comment of any kind, really, in that comment section after the fact. But that doesn't take away from how much we appreciate you guys in the comment section during the show. Say it every week. You guys are the third host of the show. It's truly incredible to be able to do this week in and week out. Again, apologies for not being able to make it last week. And Dave, the next time we're talking, we'll be making our 53-man roster predictions.
We will, and the next time we'll be talking, the preseason will be over, and we will be on the trajectory to week 1, and our pregame show will be just around the corner for week 1, Monday Night Football.
Can I spit out another hot take?
Sure.
All right, I got one hot take before we leave here. And it was a little bit subdued last year because the Buffalo Bills played in the Thursday night opener. The 17 days before the last preseason game and week 1, and I think it might be 18 days for us because we're on Monday Night Football. The bye week between the preseason and the regular season, I think it's worse than the entirety of June.
It's bad. It's like 3 months.
It feels like an entire month.
I know.
I don't even care that I have college football. First of all, that week 0 for college football is bullshit. Oh my God. Those games are bad.
Not to mention you're the second to last game or the last game of the week, the week 1, right?
Yeah.
So you wait all that, and then you got to wait through the whole weekend, and then you get it Monday, right? So
it's just it's gonna be that entire week is gonna feel like a month and a half, 2 months.
Oh yeah,
like it's not gonna be great. All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much. We really do appreciate it. And until next time, go Bills.
Go Bills.
Thank you for watching tonight's episode of the Air Raid Hour. Make sure to hit that like button on the way out. If you are catching the show on demand, leave a reply in the comments section and we will respond over the course of the week. You can always listen to every episode next day on all major podcasting platforms, including Apple Podcasts and Spotify, by searching Air Raid Buffalo. Thank you for your continued support, and as always, go Bills!